They, they say there are two things that you should never talk about: politics and religion. And here we are in this church setting, and we hear this story about paying taxes, and we are on the eve of one of the most momentous elections in our lifetime, which just all kind of makes me want to say, Jesus loves you, and then just hit my mute button or pray that at some point in the next 3 seconds my internet would crash. But let's just dig into it. Let's just go for it and see what Matthew can teach us here. Let's just see what this text has to say. This story from Matthew's gospel, it happens a day, maybe 2 days before Jesus' arrest and his execution. His ongoing debate that he's having with the religious leaders in Jerusalem, the cultural leaders, the scribes, Pharisees, priests, those folks, it's intensifying by the hour. The city is also, at the same time that he's arguing with them, the city is filling up with people. They're coming from all over the world, all over the Mediterranean world for the Passover feast. There could be as many as 50,000 people there by the end of the week. That's an awful lot of people. And the Romans, they're the occupying force, right? So they leave the kind of local odds and ends sort of government stuff up to the Jewish folks. But the Romans, they're in charge ultimately. And they have a very strong garrison there, but they don't have an army. And all of these people are coming to town. You got these rabble-rousers like Jesus coming in from the wilderness, and you just never know what's going to happen. So the Romans want to stay in control. They're paying attention to what's happening, especially because the past couple of years there have been several assassinations and some rebellions. And so they're going to keep a pretty tight rein on things. Like all biblical stories, there are lots of different ways you can come at the thing. There are different angles you can pursue, different layers that you can peel back. What I want to do this morning, just for a few minutes, is kind of look at the background of this story. You can feel something going on, can't you, in this story? Like, there is a deep twist in here, and I want to figure out what that twist is. What is it that's going on underneath this story that makes this simple question about a tax, a simple poll tax, a 1 day's wage tax on all adults? Why is that so volatile? What's going on in the background of this story that Jesus, who is concerned about the future, he's a spiritual teacher, he's deeply concerned about his people. The leaders in Jerusalem are deeply concerned about the future, deeply concerned about their people. Why can't these two groups get on the same page? Why can't Jesus and these leaders discuss what the future is supposed to be like together? Why can't they move towards some common good together? The underlying tension between the leaders and Jesus, the thing that puts a twist through this whole story, is Roman imperial power. In a word, the problem was tyranny. Tyranny, just to be clear, so we all know what we're talking about, means a nation under cruel and oppressive government that often exercises arbitrary power. Jesus, the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the crowds, really all of the people who appear in the Gospels, probably, actually, if I think about it, most of the people who appear in the New Testament lived under Roman tyranny. The Romans were an occupation force. They weren't concerned with truth or free speech or the pursuit of happiness. They were concerned about two things. They were concerned about keeping order and taxes. The Romans were in it for the money and the power. They were not interested in making the world a better place. Tyranny distorts, it divides, it diminishes communities. If you look at any group of people living under a system of violence and control, you'll see people making some very difficult choices. Choices that are perplexing and oftentimes twisted. You'll see them divided against each other. People that you'd think have a common cause be divided. You'll see them sacrifice the common good for their own personal safety. Tyranny twists human relationships, whether it's tyranny of politics or of economics. It was true in the first century. It's been true in every century since, in every country, every culture. I want to be clear about one thing. I don't want to be too hard on these Pharisees and scribes that Matthew kind of sets up as the bad guys. There's a lot of anti-Semitism going on in that. They were making difficult choices in a very difficult situation. Over in John's gospel, he has a story about this council that meets together to decide what to do about Jesus. Caiaphas, the high priest that year, says to this group, this council, that it's better for you to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed. You can hear them. You can hear them struggling with, what do we do about this situation? We're trying to hold all of this in balance. And it's a mistake. Their conclusion is a mistake that people often make in bad political situations. They sacrifice an individual person to avoid a larger massacre. We can certainly disagree with them. We can be critical of them, but we need to be really careful that we don't judge them too harshly. Which brings up another point. The fact that these leaders, the priests, the Pharisees, the others, had to have a meeting and discuss the Jesus problem means that Jesus was actually a problem. These leaders were concerned with minimizing the pain and suffering of their people, even if that meant cooperating with the Romans. I'm sure some of them colluded with the Romans and made a lot of money, got rich. But my guess is that most of these leaders are trying to lead faithfully. They were trying to lead their nation under a harsh Roman occupation. And Jesus threatened that delicate, fragile, ever-shifting balance that they had achieved between themselves and the Romans. And he was stirring things up. Regardless of whether or not he intended to do so, Jesus was leading a rebellion. He was a revolutionary in pretty much every sense of the word. Jesus was dangerous, not because he challenged the cultural leaders around him, but because he threatened the Romans. That's what made him really dangerous. And that's what the Pharisees and the priests are worried about. And the tax question, they say to him now, should we pay taxes to Caesar? That question works because Jesus' threat was real. Jesus posed a threat to the Romans because he had these large crowds following him and they could easily degenerate into a mob. But Jesus' real challenge to the Romans was not his popularity. It was not the crowd around him. It was the content of his teaching. He taught that the human heart and mind are free, that the human heart and mind are free no matter what kind of earthly tyranny they might experience. He taught that the human heart was free, but also that human life mattered. He said that our bodies are as important as our souls. That's why he healed so many people. He taught that each individual person has dignity and worth. Oppressors are always threatened by these ideas of freedom and equality and love. And they're not just threatened by the ideas, but they're especially threatened when people live those ideas. And that's what Jesus did. He didn't just talk about them, he lived them. The interesting underlying thing in this story is that we see two very different responses to tyranny, to these oppressive structures. On the one hand, the cultural leaders attempted to appease the Romans. They made concessions, they made compromises, they were trying to minimize the damage. Jesus, on the other hand, continued to stand for love, for justice, for the dignity of every human being. The leaders around him, they just wanted things to get back to normal. Let's just get back to normal, they would think. But Jesus knew that the trouble with normal is it always gets worse. There is no normal. There is no safety in tyranny. When any person, when any group of people live under the constant threat of verbal, physical, or economic violence, they find their humanity is distorted. You can compromise with it. You can compromise with it, but it's a futile effort to try to minimize it or control it. Or you can stand against it. You can stand against it by what you stand for, like Jesus standing for love, for peace, for the way of nonviolence. This story, though, carries with it two warnings. That when you do that, when you stand for love, you have got to let go of the weapons of violence. You cannot use the tools of tyranny to overthrow it. But there's another warning, that when you stand for the ways of love and peace and nonviolence, you risk your life. At the end of the week, while these leaders were gathered around their Passover meals, eating and feasting, yet with that underlying anxiety, wondering what the Romans' next violent move was. While they were there, Jesus was in the tomb, passing from death to life.